So the story of Jethro really is going to start with Moses back in Exodus chapter 2. So everybody will turn there. We'll read from chapter 2 in a moment. After Moses was placed in a basket on the Nile River, of course, Pharaoh's daughter found him, and Moses ends up being raised in the Egyptian palace. But because Moses' mother was still an influence in his life, he knows that he's not really an Egyptian. He's actually a Hebrew. Even though he's learned to speak Egyptian and to wear Egyptian clothes and live in luxury in the Egyptian palace, he's a Hebrew at heart. And he looks out and he sees one of his fellow Hebrew brothers being beaten by an Egyptian. And so Moses kills the Egyptian with the hope that his brethren will realize he's their deliverer, that Moses is going to set them free, from slavery. And that doesn't really go well at all. In fact, look in chapter 2 in verse 14, when he tries to, actually, I totally left this detail out. That's because I'm distracted. I have to fix this light over here. I don't know why. That drives me crazy. Open doors and lights on. My father raised me to turn off all the lights. So Moses, the next day after he kills the Egyptian because he was beating the Hebrew, he sees two of his Hebrew brothers fighting. And so he decides he's going to intercede in that fight and try to break that up. Well, that doesn't go well. Exodus 2 verse 14, but he said, "Who made you a prince or a judge over us? Are you intending to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" And then Moses was afraid and said, "Surely the matter has become known." Isn't their question ironic for what we're going to read in Exodus 18, where Moses does actually become the judge of all the Israelites, right? And here, though, they reject Moses as their judge and their leader, and he's afraid because now people know about the Egyptian, and now the Egyptians are going to try to kill him. And Moses is about 40 years old here, and he really doesn't fit anywhere now. He doesn't fit in with the Egyptians. The Egyptians want to kill him. His Hebrew brethren have rejected him. And so he goes into exile to the wilderness for 40 years, which is a foreshadowing, of course, of Israel later going into a 40-year exile in the wilderness. And Moses flees to a well in Midian near Mount Sinai, and he meets 7 young daughters of a priest of Midian named Reuel. And we'll learn that Reuel is an alternate name for Jethro. So let's look in Exodus 2, in verse 15 down to 22. When Pharaoh heard of this matter, he tried to kill Moses. But Moses fled from the presence of Pharaoh and settled in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came to draw water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. But then the shepherds came and drove them away. But Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. And when they came to Reuel, their father, he said, "Why have you come back so soon today?" So they said, "An Egyptian delivered us from the hand of the shepherds, and what's more, he drew the water for us and watered the flock." He said then to his daughters, "Where is he? Why is it that you've left the man behind? Invite him to have something to eat." And Moses was willing to dwell with the man, and he gave his daughter Zipporah to Moses, and then she gave birth to a son, and he named him Gershom, for he said, "I have been a sojourner in a foreign land." So Reuel is an alternate name for Jethro. There's guesses about why that's the case. We don't really know. Some people believe it's his clan. Reuel is like his clan name or like a last name. Others believe Jethro is more of his priestly name, or vice versa. Maybe Reuel is the priestly name, whereas Jethro is more common. We're not 100% sure. But his 7 daughters, they get attacked by these shepherds who apparently don't want to wait in line, right? They get to the well, and these women are going to take forever watering all their flocks, and so they're like, we'll just harass them and chase them away and make them leave so we can kind of cut in front of the line. Well, Moses, he's very sensitive to oppression and injustice. And he's not standing for this, so he stands up and defends these young women against the shepherds. And not only that, he then has the servant heart to water their flocks for them. It's like he has the heart of Rebekah, right, who watered all of Isaac's camels for him. And Jethro is just touched by this. I mean, he's like, wow, this guy, he stood up for my daughters. Let's have him over. Let's be hospitable. Let's have a meal together. And so Moses goes and he lives with Jethro and he marries his daughter and they have a child named Gershom, which means a foreigner there. And if you think about it, Moses really is a foreigner. And he would feel totally out of place here. He doesn't fit in. He grew up in the Egyptian palace. He doesn't really fit in with the Egyptians. He doesn't really fit in with the Hebrews. And yes, he's in Midian and he's kind of playing house. I mean, he's got a wife and kids and all that, but he's not really a Midianite. The Midianites came from the marriage between Abraham and Keturah after Sarah died. So the Midianites, yeah, they're related to Abraham, but they're not of the lineage of Sarah and Isaac and Jacob. So Moses is really out of place. And not only that, but Jethro was a pagan priest. At the very least, he's worshiping false gods. At the most, I would say, maybe he also tries to worship Yahweh as like one of the gods, but he's not monotheistic at all. He's a pagan. And what else is interesting is Moses' life is like the reverse mirror image of Joseph's life. Because Joseph, if you think about it, he's rejected by his brothers. He's sold into Egypt by guess who? The Midianites, Midianite traders. Okay, so he's sold into Egypt, he becomes a slave, and then he's elevated in the Egyptian palace. Moses comes along, he's born in the Egyptian palace, he's born with all this power, but he then lowers himself to the position of slave along with his Hebrew brethren. He's rejected by his brothers like Joseph, and then he goes and lives with the Midianites. So it's like this really interesting parallel in the text there. Yet despite the sad circumstances for those 40 years in Midian, Moses develops a great relationship with Jethro. And he even influences Jethro in some way by giving him knowledge of the one true God, so that when we come to our main story in Exodus 18, when Moses returns from delivering Israel from the Egyptians, Jethro actually converts to the Lord. So let's look in Exodus 18. Exodus 18, verses 10 through 12, at Jethro's reaction here to what God did for the Israelites. Verse 10, so Jethro said, "Blessed be the Lord who delivered you from the hand of the Egyptians and from the hand of Pharaoh, and who delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all the gods. Indeed, it was proven when they dealt proudly against the people." And then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took a burnt offering and sacrifices for God, and Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat a meal with Moses' father-in-law before God. So you almost get the impression that over the last 40 years, Jethro has heard about God. Through Moses, he's heard about the one true God. But now, after seeing the deliverance from Egypt, he says, now I know for a fact that he's the one true God. That he's more powerful than all the other gods. But then shortly after, Jethro notices a problem, that Moses is overburdened because he's judging all the Israelites by himself. And so let's read the rest of this account here in verse 13 down through 27. It came about the next day that Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood about Moses from the morning until the evening. Now when Moses' father-in-law saw all that he was doing for the people, he said, "What is this thing that you are doing for the people? Why do you alone sit as judge, and all the people stand about you from morning until evening?" And Moses said to his father-in-law, "Because the people come to me to inquire of God, and when they have a dispute, it comes to me, and I judge between a man and his neighbor and make known the statutes of God and his laws." But Moses' father-in-law said to him, "The thing that you are doing is not good. You will surely wear out both yourself and these people who are with you, for the task is too heavy for you. You cannot do it alone. Now listen to me. I will give you counsel, and God will be with you. You be the people's representative before God, and you bring the disputes to God, and then teach them the statutes and the laws, and make known to them the way in which they are to walk and the work they are to do. Furthermore, you shall select out of all the people able men who fear God, men of truth, those who hate dishonest gain, and you shall place these over them as leaders of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens, and let them judge the people at all times. And let it be that every major dispute they will bring to you. But every minor dispute they themselves will judge, so it will be easier for you, and they will bear the burden with you. And if you do this thing and God so commands you, then you will be able to endure and all these people also will go to their place in peace." So Moses listened to his father-in-law and did all that he said. And Moses chose able men out of all Israel, made them heads over all the people, leaders of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, of tens. They judged the people at all times. The difficult dispute they would bring to Moses, but every minor dispute they themselves would judge. Then Moses bade his father-in-law farewell, and he went his way into his own land. So what Jethro says in verses 17 through 18 is very similar to what God said to Adam when he said, "It is not good that man should be alone." There's something humorous that I think is really just a coincidence. I can't make any sort of etymological ties here. I just think it's interesting. Do you know what the Hebrew word is for alone? The Hebrew word for alone is bad. And it's spelled the same, and it's pronounced the same. I thought, oh, okay, it's B-A-D. Like, I clicked on the pronunciation, it'll do like the audio thing, and I was like, oh, it's probably something fancy like ba'ad or something. No, it's just bad. Like, all right, well, I can't make some etymological connection like that's where we got our English word. I don't think that's the point, but it does help me remember it. And he says to Moses, it's not good because you're bad, because you're alone. You're trying to do this alone, and it's too much for you, Moses. So I know that was a lot of reading. I just wanted to set all the context. We can really have discussion for the rest of class now. What is admirable about the relationship between Moses and Jethro? And if you have a comment, just raise your hand high, because we have microphones that will get to you so that the people listening in online can also hear your comments. All right, Matt's got one up front.
There was clearly, at least from what we see, there's trust. You know, you can go in a good relationship, whether it's a friend or a spouse or whatever, you should be able to go and say, hey, I see a problem. I think this needs addressing. And you don't get bent out of shape or take it personal, and there's, not escalating tensions and stuff. And Moses took it well. Jethro approached him well. So that takes a lot of trust.
Yeah, and isn't it true? Like, there's just this classic tension between in-laws. That's like if a parent-in-law tries to. Oh, Bonnie's got one too. There you go. Sorry. Go ahead, Herb. You're good. John will get one to Bonnie.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, let me make this comment first. If a parent-in-law tries to give advice to a child-in-law, there's almost this like immediate defensiveness, right? Like, this is my family. You don't have to tell me what to do. And it's almost honestly though, it comes. I want us to think about it. A lot of times this comes from insecurity on our own part, because secretly we are insecure about how we're doing things in our family. And so if somebody points out a potential flaw, like that can really hurt us. It can hurt our pride. And so we get really defensive and, hey, don't be telling me how to raise my kids. And all. So we have to be careful with that. And you don't see that with Moses. You don't say, well, you're not going to tell me what to do. Jethro, no, I mean, he's takes his advice seriously, and he actually does it. Now, I do want to be fair, because sometimes parents-in-law, they get too free with their unsolicited advice, right? And you need to be careful with that too, because that can come across as, I don't trust you to run your family, and you're just a child, and you don't know what you're doing. So it is a both way. It's a mutual respect thing, right? And so you need some balance there. I think if Jethro, like every day, was telling Moses, hey, you need to do this, and that's not good that you're doing that, they would get annoying, and then, yeah, he probably wouldn't listen, right? But there's a give and take there in that relationship. All right, Herb, and then Bonnie.
So to segue on what you just said, you're right, that you'd have to be careful. On the other hand, Jethro's been somewhere else for quite some time, and he shows up on the scene. So Moses can't accuse him of telling him what to do, sort of, meddling in his affairs. Mm-hmm. And they both understand that they care about their family, about each other, and about the people. Yeah. Jethro could see that from the beginning when he was, feeding the flocks and helping his daughters. And Jethro could see it, and Moses could see it in Jethro, that he cared about people. Yeah. And so when you see that, I'm speaking from a place of care, yes, it can certainly come across better.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, Jethro, he cares about Moses, and Moses knows that. In fact, we read in Exodus 12, verse 37, that over 1 million people came out of Egypt. Moses is trying to be the judge and arbiter of the cases for over 1 million people. That is insane. And Jethro looks at him and says, hey, this is not, I care about you, and I care about the people. And this is going to burn you out. It's going to burn the people out. This is not good, Moses. And I think Moses senses that. It's not that Jethro is just a micromanager and he's always telling me what to do. It's that he genuinely cares about me, and he's seeking my good. Yes, Miss Bonnie.
Along the same lines, there was obviously a great deal of respect there. Moses lived in Midian for 40 years, so they really, really got to know each other. And if they had been arguing and overbearing or whatever, that would have come out a long time ago.
Yeah.
And also Jethro, as the father-in-law, felt comfortable, because he knew his son-in-law, felt comfortable advising him on this. And that, again, showed they had a real good, maybe father-son relationship, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, no, that's really good. Because Moses' father's not around, right? And so, but he's got Jethro as a father figure for him. And I find it interesting too. You mentioned Moses living with Jethro for 40 years in Midian. I think one of the most striking things about that is that Jethro is a pagan. He worships false god. I don't understand how they really lived together and yet maintained a good relationship. I think sometimes the temptation is, and I've struggled with this in my own family, it's like you almost want to start setting ultimatums for your family, like, hey, I'm going to take your daughter and your grandkids, and I'm going to leave, right? Because I can't allow your pagan influence my kid, or I'm not going to talk to you until you change your way. Until you start worshiping Yahweh, like, don't talk to me at all. Like, our relationship is just cut off completely. And I've tried that in my family with my alcoholic stepfather, and it didn't really go well. It didn't really help the situation, and it actually ended up preventing me from being able to influence him for good. Now, if Jethro was like actively involved in trying to convert Moses' kids, and talking to them about like, hey, I know your dad says there's one true God, but don't, that's not true. There's many gods, kids. And like Moses would have to set boundaries and have conversations about that and say, look, you can't be teaching my kids that nonsense. But they still somehow maintain that relationship for 40 years to where, yeah, they can still talk and Moses can still receive advice. Jethro can still give advice. So it's just fascinating to me. Let me mention this, and then I see you guys. 1 Peter 3, 1 and 2. In the same way, you wives, be submissive to your own husbands, so that even if any of them are disobedient to the word, they may be won without a word by the behavior of their wives, as they observe your chaste and respectful behavior. Now, I know this is about husbands and wives, but I think this principle holds true with parents and children, right? If you have children, if you have parents that are not faithful to God, well, you can still influence them by your good and respectful behavior toward them, by your love for them and all that, and they can ultimately be won over, by your behavior. Okay, I see you, John, but Scott had you first, so go ahead, Scott, and then John.
On an intimate level, Moses and his wife, the relationship, and I think Jethro probably had the wisdom that it, was right to the core. Moses, you're so busy, you've got your family. What you were just kind of talking about, but his relationship with the daughter of Jethro. So how important is that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really good. John?
Excuse me. Okay, going back to what you said, about your father-in-law, then let's look at Jethro and Moses. Sometimes I think we have to look at things and not come in like, well, you believe this and I believe that. Let's start from a common thing. We are both human beings.
Yeah.
We're flesh and blood. There are people in here that I have told, I respectfully disagree with you on this subject. It does not mean that I hate them. I still love them. It's just that we just don't agree on that. So this might have been a mutual, I respectfully disagree with you, but like Bonnie said, over 40 years, they had time to grow and learn and mature.
Yeah, really good. Yeah, and of course, our modern day culture teaches us if you disagree, it means you hate me. And it's like, well, no, right. It's not about that. And so, yeah, it does fascinate me. I wish we had more detail about like their everyday life and interaction and how did that work when Jethro was worshiping these other gods. So really interesting. Okay, Savannah, and then we'll move on.
So where did Moses' wife go? The wife and kids, they went with Jethro, right? Like he trusted him with his wife and kids?
Yes. So what happened, it seems from the text, Exodus 4 tells us that his wife and kids actually went with Moses to Egypt, but then it seems like once Moses made that journey with them, he went in by himself and he sent his family back home to Jethro. And so now in Exodus 18, after the whole, Exodus is done, the parting of the Red Sea, right, the journey through the wilderness, now he's reunited. Actually, we didn't read it, but it was in the on the worksheet I gave you. But Exodus 18, 1 through 4, it says now Jethro brings Zipporah, and now Moses has a second child, Eliezer, who's named after the fact that God has helped them, with his Exodus. So he's reunited with his family in Exodus 18. Is that helpful? Did they go with? Yes, I think so. Yeah, they would then go with him on his trip. Though there's some question about whether Zipporah had died by Numbers 11, I think it is, where Moses marries a Cushite woman. And so some people think by that time Zipporah had died. And so Moses remarried a Cushite woman. And that's when Aaron and Miriam get upset and all that. So some tricky stuff in that story. All right, very good. Let me ask this. What's admirable about Jethro's reaction to the Exodus from Egypt? Now, I realize this question may be a little obvious, well, he believed in God and that's good. Okay, that's true. But on the worksheet, which by the way, my fault, I meant to email those out as well. I handed out physical copies. I meant to email those to folks at home who can't make it. I apologize for that. I'll do better next time. But on that worksheet I gave you all, I kind of wanted you to think about it in contrast to the reaction of the Amalekites and even the reaction of the Egyptians. This question may be requiring you to read my mind too much. I'm not sure, but do your best, and I won't judge you for that. Anybody have anything for that other than, well, he believed God. He believed in God. It's so hard to make questions ahead of time, by the way. Bonnie, go ahead. Save me.
I think maybe during those 40 years, you keep wanting to say Jethro was this pagan worshiper, pagan. Mm-hmm. I think during those years that maybe Moses' influence with his God was playing off on him because he praised God for rescuing Moses and the Israelites.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it seems like he has been influenced in some way to believe in Yahweh, the one true God. Dwayne?
There's a neat connection here I found when I was doing the bulletin article, is in Exodus chapter 17 and verse 18, or verse 21, it says, moreover, you shall select from all the people.
You mean Exodus 18 and verse 21?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Good. You're good.
You shall select from all the people able men such as fear God. And when Moses is recounting what happened with the Amalekites, he actually says that they did not fear God. So here you have, and that's in Deuteronomy 25:18. So here you have this fear God aspect of it, where Jethro says, hey, if you're going to find people to do this, you have to make sure they fear God. So he understood the importance of fear God, whereas the Amalekites was just the opposite. They went and took away the stragglers because they didn't fear God. So I thought that was an interesting connection.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, and that's basically what I want you guys to see. I didn't make that specific textual connection, but I just want you to see how rare it was at that time for a foreigner, for someone from a foreign nation, a Gentile, to actually turn and believe in God and be converted to the Lord. Look in Exodus 9 in verse 16. Exodus 9 in verse 16. When God was sending plagues on Egypt, he says this about Pharaoh. In Exodus 9 in verse 16, Indeed, for this reason I have allowed you to remain, in order to show you my power and in order to proclaim my name through all the earth. So what I want you to see is God's plan to save Israel from Egypt was not just for Israel's benefit. It was for the benefit of all the nations of the earth at the time, because the goal was for all of these foreign nations to be reminded of the one true God from which they came. All these foreigners, they came from the same God, right? You go back to Genesis 10, the table of nations, and they all scattered and all that, but they all came from the same God. They just forgot who he was. And so the saving act on Egypt was to remind them of the one true God and his power. A lot of times sometimes people think God seemed really exclusive in the Old Testament. I mean, he only ever really cared about saving the Israelites. That is not true. God used his saving acts on Israel as a beacon of light and hope to the Gentile nations around them, and any Gentiles who acknowledged him as the one true God was welcome to him. Look in Exodus 12. Exodus 12, verse 38. We talked about verse 37 where it talked about 600,000 men, aside from the children, came out. But then look in verse 38. It says, a mixed multitude also went up with them, along with flocks and herds, a very large number of livestock. So this is a mixed multitude of ethnicities. It's not just Israel who's being saved here, but many other people, including many of the Egyptians, by the way. Any of the Egyptians who were convicted by the plagues and said, hey, your God's the real deal, we'll come on out of Egypt with you, they were welcome to do so. Think about Rahab. When the Israelites are coming to conquer Canaan, she says, look, we heard about what your God did at the Red Sea, and our hearts melted, and so please have mercy on my household and please save us. And guess what? She was saved. Can you imagine if the entire land of Canaan had that same attitude? They would have all been saved. God would have done something to spare all of them. But remember, he gave them 430 years to repent. He was waiting for them to change. None of them changed, and that's why they got destroyed. But Rahab changed, and she got saved. So this has just always been God's plan, and ultimately this is God's plan in Christ Jesus as well. Yes, he chose Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and used the lineage of the Jews to bring salvation into the world through Jesus, but Jesus' sacrifice was meant to let all of the nations of the world know his true power, his true glory, his true love and mercy and grace, so that all these nations, these Gentiles, would come to him for salvation. I want to show you in Isaiah. Turn there with me in Isaiah chapter 2. I just want to show you a few passages because you just have to see this in Scripture and make sure you understand the big picture of God's plan here so that you don't think he's just an exclusivistic God who shows partiality and he only wants to save certain people and not others. No, he's out to save everybody. Isaiah 2 in verse 2. Now, it will come about that in the last days, the mountain of the house of the Lord, so anytime you see a mountain there, usually it's talking about a kingdom. The mountain or kingdom of the house of the Lord will be established as chief of the mountains and will be raised above the hills, and all the nations or Gentiles will stream to it. Look in Isaiah 52, and this is actually an introduction to Isaiah 53 and the suffering servant. In Isaiah 52, in verse 10, Isaiah 52 in verse 10 says, the Lord has bared his holy arm in the sight of all the nations, that all the ends of the earth may see the salvation of our God. To bear the arm, I mean, just think of it, it's strength, right? Just, I'm bearing my arm to you, right? God says, when I show my strength, all the nations are going to see my salvation. And he gets specific on how he's going to do it. How is the arm of the Lord going to be revealed? Well, through Jesus, the suffering servant. In Isaiah 53, he's going to come save the sins of the world. And look in Isaiah 66, one more here. Isaiah 66, verse 18. Isaiah 66, verse 18. He says, for I know their works and their thoughts, but the time is coming to gather all nations and tongues, and they shall come and see my glory. This is what God has always wanted. But the thing is, most of the time, the nations, the Gentiles, are evil and stubborn, and they don't fear the Lord, like what Dwayne was talking about. Just like the Egyptians, who were evil and stubborn, even though they saw all those plagues, they were completely blind by their own wickedness, to the point where they got drowned in the Red Sea. And then when Israel comes out of Egypt, they get attacked by the Amalekites. Imagine that reaction, right? You're the Amalekites, and I don't know, maybe they just hadn't heard what God just did for his people parting the Red Sea. Maybe they're just ignorant about it. I don't know. Or they're just stubborn, and they're like, hey, this is a great time to try to ambush the people of God, even though he just defeated the most powerful empire on the planet. We think we can jump in and defeat. I mean, the foolishness, the arrogance. And that's why the Amalekites aren't saved. That's why the Egyptians aren't saved. But Jethro and his household, they've got a good heart. Like Bonnie said, they actually have a receptive, honest, humble heart. And that's an amazing thing that we need not take for granted in the text. Herb?
And that's exactly what I was going to say. Maybe this
I'm
is
sorry.
what Bonnie was trying to say. So Bonnie, forgive me. I'm not trying to just repeat, but Jethro was with Moses all that time. Mm-hmm. And Moses never gave up on Jethro, and God never gave up on Jethro. And God knew that Moses would need to hear some good advice at some point. And part of his plan was that Jethro, when he saw the truth, after 40 years, however long it was when he was converted, that God knew that he would come to the truth and would accept it, and then he could go on and advise Moses. And so it's all the more admirable that Jethro, he never turned away. He watched Moses, and we don't know what was going on, but he witnessed Moses. And so to me, what was admirable was that he listened, and he hung in there, and God hung in there with him.
Yeah.
And then at the right time, he became God's man.
Yeah, and the patience that God had, right? And then Moses had. I mean, especially with family members, we want them changed right now, right? Like, just become a Christian already. But it's like 40 years it took him. Sometimes it just takes a long time for things to sink in, even in our own lives. All right, God has been tremendously patient with us, but you see God's patience here with Jethro. All right, did somebody else, Tim?
Yeah, I was in a coffee house in Duluth, Minnesota, and this passage came up, and they were talking about, our political leaders and our government, and this was used. This man sees this as the theocracy for which it was, where God's involved in. I'm losing my voice.
I know.
Involved in government, and it's interesting how he sees the importance of God in the middle of everything here. Yeah. And as we looked at this passage, to share the Lord God, get leaders who are godly, bring God into the middle of the situation. That's what he's suggesting, that you bring God. And I just remember somebody in that coffee house goes, the Bible actually says that, and that God should be in the middle of making these kind of decisions and things like that. That's an admirable quality. He knew that can glue a lot.
Yeah, really good thought. Well, I asked this question. I'll probably just answer it for time's sake, just so that it gives us more time. Well, I think we're doing okay. Let me give it to you. What life experiences in the previous chapters might make Moses think that he has to do this, that he has to be the one to judge the people all on his own? All right, Carol's got one up front here.
The one that first comes to my mind is when he goes up to Mount Sinai and he comes down, and absolutely everybody has gone against what he had left them with. And he had to stand in between God and those people so that God didn't smite them.
Yeah.
So I think that he felt like he was the one that had to stand between them and the people to protect, to be the voice of God.
Yeah. Now, in fairness, that particular example won't happen yet until the next chapter. But those patterns have already started. They come out of Egypt, and immediately people start complaining, and they go to Moses and say, "Hey, you brought us out here to die," and Moses has to go to God, and then God, tells them what to tell the people. And so, there's already kind of a pattern of Moses being an intercessor between the people, and it just seems like the people can't do anything right, and Moses has to be the guy to go and handle everything, for God. And so he just assumes, well, I got to take care of all these other legal cases and stuff too. Yeah, Debbie?
Well, I'm thinking even when he was in Pharaoh's household, And he was the only Hebrew in the Egyptian household in the kingdom. He knew he was a Hebrew, and he went out to mediate between those who were fighting and those who were killing the Hebrews. So I think it may have even gone back to then when he was just a young man.
Okay, good. Yeah, Moses, I mean, I said it earlier, he's sensitive to oppression, to injustice. And so he sees these people have all these legal cases, they have all these problems. I got to do something about this. Right? And that's actually very admirable. This is coming from a good place. Moses wants to help these people. He wants to fight for justice. He wants to be the judge and make sure these people get their cases heard. Because think about it, when they were in Egypt, did anybody care about their cases? No, they were slaves. They didn't have any legal rights. They're not going to go to Pharaoh and say, my slave, he stole my shovel. They're not going to care about any of that stuff. But now that they're free people, well, now they've got all these rights and they got all these problems. And Moses, because he's compassionate, he wants to dive in and help out with that. All right, anything else on that one? I think we covered most of what I had for that. All right, let's get practical here. What practical lessons can we learn from Jethro's advice to Moses? I like what Tim said earlier about getting God involved. Matt's got one. Getting God involved in the discussion. Even after Jethro gives the advice to Moses, he puts a little caveat in there, and he says, do what I tell you, as long as God agrees with it, right? As long as God commands it, you follow this advice. So even Jethro, when he gives advice, he's not really doing it as the final authority. He's saying you check with God on this. So I do like that practical aspect Tim mentioned. Yeah, Matt?
To go to the lesson earlier this morning about burdens, not all burdens are sinful. And I think sometimes whether it's just human nature, our culture, the combination, Moses could have said I hear your concern, thanks. I'm just going to pray to God for more strength and I got this. And that can be dangerous. We burn ourselves out. You're not doing your best job. So we need to be willing. We need to have that relationship with each other. We need to have the heart of humbleness to see if someone comes to you, and we don't have any evidence that Moses was complaining. He asked him what's going on. And he just said, I see a problem here. I see you struggling. Maybe you don't even know you're struggling because you're just doing the thing. Yeah. And if someone comes to you and says, hey, I think you might need some help, maybe the answer for strength is to send Jethro to say, do it differently. We need to be careful not to be like, yeah, I got this. God will help me. I got it. If somebody's voicing a concern, we should take that seriously.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, it's like you're drowning out in the ocean, right? And a boat comes and they say, hey, don't worry, I don't need you. I'm praying to God. He's going to send a solution. Well, no, he sent the boat. So God is sending Jethro to Moses. And maybe Moses was just wearing this on his face. Maybe he wasn't complaining, but he's coming home and the kids want to hang out and I don't have time for that. And Jethro, he sees this problem. You said a lot of really great things there. I guess I can boil it down to a couple things. We need to set realistic expectations for ourselves. I mean, this was not only not realistic for Moses, it wasn't realistic for the people either. I mean, think about how much we hate the line at the DMV. I mean, this made the DMV line look like nothing, right? Because Moses, he's got people waiting in line from morning until evening, and then at the end of the day, he's got to change the open sign to closed and say, come back tomorrow, because I can't get to it today, right? And some of these people may be waiting for weeks or for months before Moses can get to their case. It was William Gladstone, he was the British Prime Minister in the 1800s. He said, he was the one famous for saying, justice delayed is justice denied, right? And so these people are going to get restless with Moses, right? And they're going to, what kind of leader is it? He doesn't even care about my case. He doesn't care about justice. This is a disaster. And so set realistic expectations. And then the other thing that was in my notes that was basically a paraphrase of what you said was we need people in our lives to be honest enough with us when they can see we've taken on too much. Because sometimes people can see things that we don't. I remember that the elders at PSD getting on to me because I used to wait to take my vacations until September. And then I would take 3 in a row. I'd take one in September, then one in November, and then one in December. And that was fine. That was actually a really fun end of the year. But from January to September, I was completely burning myself out. And the elders had to say, you need to space these things out. Or you're putting too much on you. to handle, and I appreciate they were looking out for me like that, and I am working on that. I am trying to space those out. I only waited till July this year. I'm going to the end of July this year, but last year I think I took a spring one. So anyway, I'm a work in progress, but we need people who love us enough to have those conversations with us. Did y'all ring the first bell yet? I just want to make sure that first bell gets rung. Go ahead and hit it, Chris. You see it on the left? Yeah, the left one. There you go. Yeah, the left one. Oh, it's the right one? Oh, wow. That's all right. Good job, Chris. See, you. All right, go ahead.
I'll wait for the next question. Mine was answered.
Oh, was it? Okay. Sorry, Veronica. All right. Anybody else on practical lessons we can learn? All right, Bonnie.
I think that we need to learn that we don't have to bear our burdens alone.
Yeah.
If there are
good.
willing people to help us, that we should let them.
Yeah, I love how Jethro words it. Right? He says, let the people bear the burden with you. Right? When you appoint these men as judges, they're helping to bear this burden, so you don't have to do it all by yourself. That's so practical in the church, right? Sometimes preachers try to, Herb's got one, sometimes preachers try to bear everything on their own, and elders try to bear everything on their own, and we just need help. Parents, you got to help. Husbands and wives, you got to keep each other accountable, right? If one of you is just being unrealistically burdened and bearing all the burden, you need to share that with each other and help each other kind of stay accountable. Veronica, you might have to give yours up here because, yeah, Herb.
And that voice,
Steve's got one over here.
sorry, that voice that's whispering in our ear that we can't share it with others is the deceiver telling us that we've got to do it alone.
Yes.
And Moses, thank goodness, didn't listen to that voice. And maybe that's what kept him from asking. We don't know. I mean, if I wish he were here today, and we could say, Moses, why didn't you ask?
Yeah.
But we can't do that. Sometimes there is a voice that says, if I ask, that means I'm not good enough. I'm not acceptable.
Yeah.
And I'm a failure. And we've got to not listen to that voice.
Yeah.
Thank goodness Moses didn't.
Yeah. Really well said, Steve.
Just real quick to think about several different contexts throughout the Bible. You see God condemn in various ways people who are determined to invent evil and various schemes and various machinations to provide that. Jethro here, through no divine inspiration, at least that I'm aware of, he's determined to invent good. We can quite often and quite easily get set into our ways that there is a set way to do good. And while, of course, we don't want to add anything or take anything away that would not be right to do so, it is good to try and find new ways of inventing good, of making schemes, for lack of a better way to put it, of good.
Yeah.
Jethro is bold enough and courageous enough to try to do that here, and both Moses and clearly God approve.
Yeah, he's a problem solver, right? That's really good. Yeah, Megan?
I just think it's interesting that sometimes as Christians, we kind of put our blinders on and we think that nobody in the world has anything, any advice worth me following. And because Moses was vulnerable and did trust him, that example ends up with such a happy ending.
Yeah. That's really good. Yeah, because sometimes the reason we're doing everything ourselves is because we're prideful, and we think that nobody else can really handle this but me, and nobody else has anything to offer but me. And if I left, yeah, exactly, especially non-Christians. Yeah, so Moses had the humility here to accept that advice. And let me say this too: Moses needed to make sure not to sacrifice his family on the altar of his busy schedule. I mean, that was Jethro's daughter-in-law Moses would be neglecting, right? If he's judging millions of people, do you think he really could, spend much time with his family? Jethro saw that. He cared about that. The truth is, when we say yes to something or someone, it means we usually have to say no to something or someone else. And so we have to be careful to choose our yeses and to choose our nos and to prioritize. And I'm sorry we didn't get to that last question. I know, Veronica, I'm sure you had something great to say there, but we just ran out of time. But make sure we set boundaries Learn to say no. Know your limitations. You don't have to control everything yourself. Appreciate it very much.